Hi, welcome back. Last time I was reading from a book called Star Wars and Philosophy. I read a little bit of chapter 1, and I was thinking of returning to finish chapter 1 today. But as I was reading it, I realized it was a lot about God, and it was written from the perspective of a believer, an apologist, and basically I want to stay away from religion on this channel. It's a little bit of a contentious topic, so because I still want to read about philosophy, instead of continuing with Star Wars and philosophy, I'm going to read a Wikipedia article about existentialism, which is a branch or a school of philosophy that I find very interesting. Existentialism is a tradition of philosophical inquiry that explores the nature of existence by emphasizing experience of the human subject, not merely the thinking subject, but the acting, feeling, living human individual. In the view of the existentialist, the individual's starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential angst, or variably existential attitude, dread, etc., or a sense of disorientation, confusion, or anxiety in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. Existentialism is associated mainly with certain 19th and 20th century European philosophers who shared an emphasis on the human subject despite profound doctrinal differences. Many existentialists regarded traditional systematic or academic philosophies in both style and content as too abstract and remote from concrete human experience. A primary virtue in the existentialist thought is authenticity. Soren Kierkegaard is generally considered to have been the first existential philosopher, though he did not use the term existentialism. He proposed that each individual, not society or religion, is solely responsible for giving meaning to life and living it passionately and sincerely, or authentically. Existentialism became popular in the years following World War II, thanks to Jean-Paul Sartre, who read Martin Heidegger while in a POW camp, and strongly influenced many disciplines besides philosophy, including theology, drama, art, literature, and psychology. I'm going to go to the section called Definitional Issues and Background. The labels existentialism and existentialist are often seen as historical conveniences, inasmuch as they were first applied to many philosophers in hindsight, long after they had died. In fact, while existentialism is generally considered to have originated with Kierkegaard, the first prominent existentialist philosopher to adopt the term as a self-description was Sartre. Sartre posits the idea that what all existentialists have in common is the fundamental doctrine that existence precedes essence, as the philosopher Frederick Copleston explains. According to the philosopher Stephen Cromwell, defining existentialism has been relatively difficult, and he argues that it is better understood as a general approach used to reject certain systematic philosophies rather than as a systematic philosophy itself. Sartre himself, in a lecture delivered in 1945, described existentialism as the attempt to draw all the consequences from a position of consistent atheism. Although many outside Scandinavia consider the term existentialism to have originated from Kierkegaard himself, it is more likely that Kierkegaard adopted this term, or at least the term existential, as a description of his philosophy, from the Norwegian poet and literary critic Johann Sebastian Kammermeyer Wellhaven. This assertion comes from two sources. The Norwegian philosopher Erik Lundestad refers to the Danish philosopher Frederick Christian Sibbern. Sibbern is supposed to have had two conversations in 1841, the first with Wellhaven and the second with Kierkegaard. It is in the first conversation that it is believed that Wellhaven came up with a word that he said covered a certain thinking which had a close and positive attitude to life, a relationship he described as existential. This was then brought to Kierkegaard by Sibbern. Second claim comes from the Norwegian historian Rune Slagstad, who claims to prove that Kierkegaard himself said the term existential was borrowed from the poet. He strongly believes that it was Kierkegaard himself who said that Hegelians do not study philosophy existentially, to use a phrase by Wellhaven from one time when I spoke with him about philosophy. Concepts. Existence precedes essence. Sartre argued that a central proposition of existentialism is that existence precedes essence, which means that the most important consideration for individuals is that they are individuals, independently acting and responsible, conscious beings, rather than what labels, roles, stereotypes, definitions, or other preconceived categories the individuals fit. The actual life of the individuals is what constitutes what could be called their true essence, instead of there being an arbitrarily attributed essence others use to define them. Thus, human beings, through their own consciousness, create their own values and determine a meaning to their life. This view is in contradistinction to what Aristotle and Aquinas held. They taught that essence precedes individual existence. And what they mean by that, by essence preceding existence, is that you are who you are before you exist. That is what Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas believed. Although it was Sartre who explicitly coined the phrase, similar notions can be found in the thought of existentialist philosophers such as Heidegger and Kierkegaard. Quote, "The subjective thinker's form, the form of his communication, is his style. His form must be just as manifold as are the opposites that he holds together. This systematic eins, zwei, drei is an abstract form that also must inevitably run into trouble whenever it is applied to the concrete." Also, eins, zwei, drei means 1, 2, 3 in German. To the same degree as the subjective thinker is concrete, to the same degree his form must also be concretely dialectical. But just as he himself is not a poet, not an ethicist, not a dialectician, so also his form is none of these directly. His form must first and last be related to existence, and in this regard he must have at his disposal the dialectical, the poetic, the ethical, the religious, subordinate character, setting, etc., which belonged to the well-balanced character of the aesthetic production, are in themselves breadth. The subjective thinker has only one setting, existence, and has nothing to do with localities and such things. The setting is not the fairyland of the imagination, where poetry produces consummation, nor is the setting laid in England, and historical accuracy is not a concern. The setting is inwardness in existing as a human being. The concretion is the relation of the existence categories to one another. Historical accuracy and historical actuality are breadth. Soren Kierkegaard. Some interpret the imperative to define oneself as meaning that anyone can wish to be anything. However, an existentialist philosopher would say such a wish constitutes an inauthentic existence, what Sartre would call bad faith. Instead, the phrase should be taken to say that people are 1, defined only insofar as they act, and 2, that they are responsible for their actions. For example, someone who acts cruelly towards other people is by that act defined as a cruel person. Furthermore, By this action of cruelty, such persons are themselves responsible for their new identity. This is as opposed to their genes. This is as opposed to their genes or human nature bearing the blame. As Sartre says in his lecture, Existentialism is a humanism. Quote, man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. End quote. The more positive, therapeutic aspect of this is also implied. A person can choose to act in a different way and to be a good person instead of a cruel person. I'm going to stop there for today. Thank you for listening, for watching my videos. If you like them, hit the like button. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Leave me a comment and tell me how I'm doing. Or, if you think I'm a fathead, leave me a comment to that effect. I welcome all input. Thank you. Have a good day.